Hello and a warm welcome. This is a recording of Michael Heppner's talk entitled Keeping Alive the Jewish Heritage in a Town Without Jews. This is a talk that was first given in September 2022 at a B'nai B'rith online gathering. It has now been updated with additional material. My name is Carrie Heppner-Flack. I'm going to be introducing Michael, who's also my father. Let me just share a few things about Michael. During the 1970s and 80s, he regularly traveled on business in communist Eastern Europe, and especially in what was then Czechoslovakia. This led him to become very involved in exploring the lost heritage of Jewish communities across Bohemia and Moravia. He became very involved in the heritage of one particular Czech town, Kolin. And this led him to helping other congregations that had been entrusted with Czech scrolls and to build the bond with those lost congregations from Bohemia and Moravia. And this led him to being invited to become the research director of Memorial Scrolls Trust in London between 2002 and 2010. I'm really looking forward to hearing this talk. And I'm going to hand over now to Michael.
Well, hello, and thank you for coming to this meeting. I hope you'll find the talk interesting. I was invited by my B'nai B'rith lodge to give a talk on the theme of renewal in relation to the Czech memorial scrolls. As you probably know, 1,564 Czech Torah scrolls from Bohemia and Moravia that were kept safe in Prague during the Second World War were brought to London in 1964 and found their way back into Jewish life with congregations across the world. And that is a story in itself, a story of renewal, but that is for another time. Today, I should like to talk about a different form of renewal. How to keep alive the Jewish heritage in a town that is now without Jews. It all started in 1979 when I met Olga in Kolin, a very ordinary provincial town in a very drab communist Czechoslovakia. Olga was 84, and she was one of the two Jewish survivors in a town which had had a Jewish life that went back 600 years. And by then there were just two, Olga and her son, Milos, and a memorial to the 480 Jews from Kolin who were killed by the Nazis. I had been given a tip-off to find Olga, and I took the train to Kolin with an address, and I found her at home. She had no idea who I was. She'd not been expecting anybody, but she didn't behave that way. I told her that I was Jewish, that I was from London, and I quickly realized that she was deaf and that I had to speak and listen in German. And because she was deaf, I had to write messages on a pad. She put on her coat and took me for a walk to meet her friends. Her friends, all 480 of them, at the memorial in the new cemetery. And they weren't only her friends, they were also her customers, because she had run a shoe shop. I couldn't talk to her, but she could certainly talk to me. And on the way to the cemetery, the story of the liquidation of the community came pouring out. This was the first time, the first of many visits and adventures, and I learned a lot more at that over time. She was having a struggle, and I did what I could to help her materially. Her hearing aid was no longer working, and I managed to replace it, which was quite an adventure. And her broken TV needed replacing, and I managed to do that, which was also a bit of a project. But more importantly, I came back as often as I could. Even more important, I gave her a promise. And that promise was that her congregation, her friends, would not be forgotten, because they would become part of our living congregation in London, where our synagogue had a memorial scroll from Kolin. I knew her only for 2 years. She died at the age of 86, but her effect on my life was profound and lasting. One of the last things she did was to introduce me to 2 historians at the town museum, and she gave me a copy of a book, the book about the life and fate of the town's Jews, written by its rabbi, who had survived. My work enabled me to return to Kolin many times during the communist period, and I became friendly with the 2 historians from the town museum, and with one of them in particular. And it was with their help that I started to compile an archive of documents, many of them produced by them and handed over to me, including a list of all those 480 people. And I kept coming back. I got to know the communist mayor, the man with the golden teeth. And the Jewish heritage of the town was no longer a forgotten issue. Dr. Jelinek was an intellectual who had been disgraced in the 1968 Prague Spring, lost his job, and ended up in the town museum in Kolin. And he was motivated by my interest to document the town's Jewish heritage. He had someone to work for. He even got a group of young people to help clear the undergrowth in the historic old cemetery, dating back to the 1400s, and get it back into some sort of order. And you can see from this picture taken at the time that it needed getting into order. At that time, the priority at home was to make the people of the congregation in Northwood, my congregation, aware that we had a bond with the congregation in Kolin, and to stimulate their interest in the heritage of Jewish Kolin, which had been donated to us with the scroll. The rabbi gave sermons, we wrote talks, we wrote articles in the magazine, and we staged some seminars to tell other congregations with scrolls from Bohemia and Moravia what could be done and to encourage them to do their own project with their scroll, with their Czech scroll. And also, every June at the time of the deportation, in our congregation, in our synagogue, we held one dedicated Shabbat that was dedicated to the Jews of our Kolin scroll. We even managed to bring to Northwood the Ark surround that I had discovered in the prayer hall of the new cemetery in Kolin, and I managed to get it back to London before that chapel was demolished. It now dominates the bimah in our synagogue in Northwood as a constant reminder to the congregation of the pledge that Olga's congregation would never be forgotten. Now, the Velvet Revolution of 1989 was unexpected, but it came as no surprise to those of us who saw the state of the Czech economy under the constant draining influence of its Russian masters. A result was that Dr. Jelinek was restored to the position as head of the military museum in Prague. I had never realized that that was where he had worked before, though I had a suspicion because he did talk quite a lot about the SOE, the Special Operations Executive, which worked behind the lines during the war. But before he left Kolin, Jelinek arranged with his friends who were now in political power for a new roof to be put on the derelict 17th century synagogue, which was in a really bad state. The integrity of the synagogue having been secured by the new roof, I rather rashly announced to the mayor that we would bring 100 Jews to Kolin in 1992 to see how the work of restoration of the interior was getting on. The town took up the challenge and undertook the massive task of restoring carefully the interior of the synagogue. And what was remarkable was that it was the town that took this on, because elsewhere it was charities and the Jewish community that paid for this work. In the case of Kolin, it was their project, it was their town, and it was their money. With Czechoslovakia now free for tourists. We brought our first Jewish tour to Kolin in June 1992, coincidentally 50 years after the date of the deportation. That's a picture of the inside of the synagogue before it was restored. And here we are. The first busload had come to Kolin, and Dr. Jelinek left the museum and came back for the day to Kolin to give an expert commentary on the ancient cemetery that he had helped to preserve. From then on, every 3 years or so, a new tour group came to Kolin to mark the anniversaries of the deportation in June 42 and the return of a few survivors in 1945. And this motivated the town to continue to restore the synagogue building, which then became a venue for concerts, as well as an occasional place of worship. And news of this traveled to the United States of America, where synagogues, particularly those with a scroll from Kolin, were also interested in what happened. And as a result of our initiative and their interest, they also sent tours to Kolin. And the Jews kept coming back. So the town, particularly the mayor and the leaders, felt it necessary to play an active part in these activities. And local people were encouraged to be involved in the events and the ceremonies that took place. And the Jews kept coming back to the town without Jews. Now, two of the young people who'd been in Jelinek's working party that cleared the old cemetery had joined the staff of the town library and the town museum, and they took it upon themselves to continue Jelinek's work, his research, and they curated a series of exhibitions over the years which were displayed at the synagogue to coincide with the anniversaries and the visiting tours, and to help educate the town's students and pupils, and also the people in the town, about the lost heritage, the lost Jewish heritage of their town. Mayors came and went, but they were all aware that the Jews kept coming back and that it was necessary to keep both the old cemetery and the new cemetery in good order for the sake of the town's reputation. And the curators produced another exhibition, and we started to come up with ideas. We had identified the school building where the Jews had been confined for 3 dreadful days prior to their deportation in June 1942. And we arranged with the town to have memorial plaques placed both inside and outside the building, and we organized the dedication ceremony for our next tour. And the school, which is a junior school, enthusiastically took up the idea. And when we came back, we were surprised to find that the children and the teachers had created their own exhibition. And the children of the school crowded into the hallway and the corridors and the entrance hall of the school for the dedication ceremonies for the blacks. And then they took part in the first walk to the station, in the footsteps of the Jews who had been marched from the school to the nearby station in Zalaby for what was to be their final journey to Terezin. And this is an idea that can be repeated. We then suggested that the high school and the business school might undertake a project where their pupils, working in groups, could research the story and the fate of the Jewish pupils from Kolin who were deported. Now, that project took 3 years to complete, involved more than 60 children, and they were encouraged to talk about their project to their parents, to people they knew, to get any recollections and information that they might have. And managing this project were the two curators from the library and the museum. And when the next tour came, the children made their presentations to us about the children, the Jewish children, and all that they had found out. And then this led to the production of a book, Children in the Quest of Children, written by the students with their research. It's a very interesting and it's a remarkable book, and it's available in English, and it tells the story of that research project. So we go on now to the next visit. And for that visit, we had asked that the high school, no, it was the business school, where the high school used to be. We asked for the business school to arrange for a memorial plaque for their lost students. And a teacher at the school produced a booklet for the students there. That's the business school. The teacher arranged for this booklet with details of the names of the children who were on the plaque. And if you're interested in the character in the photograph, that's my grandson, who came along for the occasion. So the next thing was a surprise. A set of Stolperstein. I don't know whether you know what Stolperstein are, but we'll go through that. a set of Stolperstein appeared in the town square, outside the house where the Ornstein family had lived. And these memorial plaques embedded in the ground outside the house, the pink house where they had lived, was the result of an initiative by the Technical College, where they had been studying the Holocaust. And having heard about the Stolperstein initiative, the school had applied to become an associate of the foundation and to be responsible in the town for citing the memorials. And these were the first 4 memorials that they had placed in the town. And this led us to the idea of getting together with the Technical College. And we offered from London to sponsor a series of Stolpersteine that were selected to create a trail round the town square and the former ghetto in front of the houses and the business premises of the deported Jews. So you can walk round, you come across these memorial plaques in the ground, and you're following a trail. And the interesting thing is that the individuals at the Ark Synagogue in Northwood sponsored these stones and these clusters of stones. And that was very, very unusual, because normally they're only sponsored by people for their friends or their relatives who perished. And here we have a case of strangers volunteering with cost of over £100 each to sponsor a person from their town to be part of this chain of stones round the town. And the Technical College took on the task of getting these memorial stone blocks made and placing them round in the ground, round the town, outside these houses or businesses. You can see the cubes, and on the surface is this plate with the details of the person involved. And the secondary result of this was that the Kolin Stolperstein Trail became a form of memorial that we believe is exceptional, if not unique. We have not heard of Stolperstein being used this way anywhere else. A walking tour round the town, and with it we produced a guidebook telling the story of each Stolperstein or set of Stolperstein, and that's what the book looks like. So we found that the Kolin Stolperstein Trail had inspired another initiative. And this was coming from the town. It was a remarkable calendar. I've got ahead of myself. This is an example of when the Stolperstein are placed in the ground, that the children and people from the town come to see the ceremony. So they are very aware of what is happening in the town. And this is the calendar. This is the 2016 calendar. The first calendar was with pictures of the Stolperstein. The 2016 calendar was a picture with pictures of all the important Jewish sites in the town: the synagogue, the cemetery, the ghetto, the Stolperstein. And this was entirely at the initiative of the technical college, and we consider it to be a remarkable phenomenon. The next initiative also came from the town. In the former ghetto, which is preserved, in the former ghetto, next door to the entrance to the synagogue, stood an ancient, dilapidated, medieval house. And this house was where Rabbi Feder and all the rabbis before him had lived for centuries. And this building even included a mikveh, a triple mikveh. And the town bought that building and the building behind it, two derelict Jewish buildings, the second of which was the former Jewish town hall. You can see they are in dreadful condition. The town bought them with the plan to restore them to museum standard as another feature of Jewish Kolin, and to use these buildings as exhibition centers for all the interesting exhibitions that the curators at the museum had produced over the years. Exhibitions about the rabbi and exhibitions about the Jewish history of the town. And inside the administration building of the synagogue complex, the pink building, this has been turned into an educational center with a lecture hall where the students from the schools of the town and townsfolk can come for lectures and educational events for the schools. Now, while the adult tours from London and elsewhere kept coming every 2 or 3 years, there then started a second group of tours, and that was the tours of the young people from the Ark Synagogue in Northwood when they had completed their Kabbalat Torah year. And they were taken to Prague and then to Kolin as the climax of their bar mitzvah education. And when they get there now, they find another new feature of the town. And that is that the town has installed, oh, there they are. That is a group of adults. Then the students came as well. And then, if you go there now, you will find that the town has installed these signposts in the town, indicating the way to the important sites, to the synagogue, to the old cemetery, to the new cemetery, to the ghetto, as well as to the station, to the town hall, and to the church. So when you go there, you can find your way to all the important places. In addition to that, at the Jewish sites, and this is the old cemetery as it now is, you can see there is a information tablet with information in Czech and English about the site. And if they go to the synagogue, there's the plaque, there's the information again about the synagogue. And in the synagogue, that's what it looks like now. A great move forward and returned to some of its former glory. So let's change to a completely different aspect. Hannah Lustig was another survivor from Kolin. As a teenager, she'd been deported and endured the horrors of brutality and barbarism of the Nazis, and she'd been on one of the death marches, had ended up in Buchenwald, and was a survivor. And she settled in Israel, married. It's well known now as Hannah Greenfield, the author and campaigner for Holocaust education and awareness. And when she heard of all our activity in Kolin over the years, she joined us and made a huge contribution and returned to the town many times. And she was a keen swimmer. She died in 2014. And in 2015, her husband and family came to the next tour, our next tour to Kolin. And she and her husband and children mentioned that she had been a keen swimmer, but that while swimming in the River Laber had been her passion, but it had been prohibited because of pollution in the early 1930s. What was worse, when the Nazis came, she'd been banned from swimming in the town swimming pool. And we happened to ask the mayor whether there was any swimming in the river today. And he said it was not, in spite of the fact that the river was now clean after a major cleanup, but nobody was swimming in the river. So the idea was hatched to have a wild swim in the River Laber dedicated to the memory of Hannah Lustig Greenfield. The first such event occurred in 2018. It was a great success. It's now an annual event, popular with the local people, bringing people to Kolin for the swim from Prague and from elsewhere. And it is now the Hannah Greenfield Memorial Swim every August, an annual event. And now it's even been recognized as part of the Czech Long Distance Swimming Association, and it has its own T-shirt. A rather different example of renewal in Kolin. There is Hannah, the 1992 event dedicating the plaque outside the synagogue to the deportation of 50 years before. And here are the swimmers. And there they go. Back in 1980, Olga Kodichka had given me a very meaningful gift. The book that her rabbi, Richard Fader had written about the heritage and fate of his congregation in Kolin. Written in Czech, it contains a roll call of all the members of his community who'd been the victims of the Kolin, of the Nazi genocide. And we in London had it translated into English and published the English version. The first edition had gone out of print. It was difficult to find a competitive printer for the second edition. But we found one where, nearby in the town of Kolin, a town whose Jews had been deported from Kolin, an inspired coincidence. The book about the Jewish heritage of the town, printed by a local printer as a symbol that it is alive, the heritage is alive in the town that is now without Jews. So, over 4 decades since I made my pledge to Olga, the town has now got an impressive collection of Jewish features. In the town centre are the prominent directional signs showing you the way to the sites, as well as the large information boards in Czech and in English at each site. There's the ancient cemetery from 1418, the restored synagogue from 1696, the Holocaust memorial with the names, the historic ghetto as it was, as it is, and the rabbi's house awaiting restoration from funds which we hope will come from the EU and other sources, which will be the culminating feature in the town as long with the old town hall. And finally, of course, there is the Kolin Stolperstein Trail, a memorial unique for all the people to see and where people can wander around and remember the individuals of Kolin, because we don't remember just the community. We want to remember the people as individuals, to remember the people as we would want to be remembered, as individuals, and not to be lost in the anonymity of the 6 million. And that is what I call renewal.